You're gonna have to say it louder or text me.
I'm not gonna say it now.
I know.
Yeah. Well, the 52nd.
Can I mess it up again for you?
Okay, that was not cool. Seriously?
Tino, are you like one of those people that can like do it in however many?
I can do it really quickly.
That you
Like,
can? Have you like memorized? Yeah, I was like, oh,
memorize everything. I can do it so well. Just kidding, I messed it up.
oh. Wait, Tino, can you do it? It's like things like where you like memorize.
That's the one.
That's the one. Just fix time. Let's see him do it. You couldn't play the piano. Okay, so I'm just thinking.
I'm gonna get a better cue.
No.
Because if you feel this one,
Yeah, no.
like just try to.
Oh, yeah, usually. Oh, yeah.
Brady.
Pull up.
It really does. It hurts so bad.
Oh my god. Yeah, you can take yours first. Delivering like smack slowly in slow motion.
Liz, he trusts that.
That'd be hilarious.
See, yeah, that's not their
Mr. Kessler walks in and he just knocked out.
Yeah.
No, our world star. Sorry, team. Yeah, we need to put this on world star.
I thought I left it a booster. I was like, that's why I pulled up your guy.
What did you guys do?
Hey, I don't have mine.
No, I'll talk to you later.
Let us begin!
Aw, Kevin's on the front.
Chris.
Copy what? You're gonna cheat, huh?
I'm not cheating. I'm copying the work.
Jonah, please don't cheat.
Yeah, everyone gets actually go cheat now. Look at
The notes right now. You got it. Write them down quick.
I don't understand what's on the board.
Read.
I can't do that. I don't have enough brain to think.
Hey, please don't cheat. All right. I honestly don't like it when you do that. No, I'm looking at what page? What the
No,
heck?
that's cheating. Don't cheat.
You're 71. Is that the answer? 3.
No, it's 63.
Now, Jordan, you can just get Jordan. What will we be doing here after we take
Watching Dora.
Yeah, watching Dora.
Naruto? What?
Dora.
Naruto. Naruto.
Yeah.
We won't be doing
Why not?
that. Will we do anything? Yeah, you got a final project.
But
What about if we have 2 finals?
Oh, there is one more. No, there's not actually.
Can we do our project in? Oh, never mind.
What do we have 2
Yeah, that's gonna fall out again.
Hmm?
That's gonna fall out again.
What is?
Humor only works if it's unexpected.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think
That
it's
was
false. We expected that.
Yeah, we all expected that.
Expected what?
Expected what?
Here's a question for you.
That means you have no
Right is right and wrong is wrong.
You only have one name.
Johnny.
Madison said that she had a joke.
I have a joke.
It's not gonna be funny because it's
I
expected.
said thanks.
No, I have one. Can I tell it to you?
May I?
Yeah.
Okay. What's the name of a guy who has no shins?
Spencer?
It's their own name.
No, Tony. You know, 'cause there's no shins.
What about Tino?
It took you guys that long?
That comes from Caden.
Do you know, Manson, do you know
what's blue that smells like red paint?
Blue paint.
Blue paint.
Blue smells like red paint.
Good old
Dustin, do you know what's green and invisible?
This
I've heard
cabbage.
this before.
It was so.
My friends.
Madison, do you know what you call a dinosaur that lost its glasses? Do you think he's ours?
Why is it so hard?
It's the only way it's funny. You just say it normal. It's not funny.
Do you think Thesaurus?
So I need to present, my favorite joke is on the presentation. You've probably heard it before, but if you present it right, it's so funny. What is it? 2 peanuts walked into a bar. One of them
I like
Oh,
dinosaur better.
yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
cabbage.
that was, because then you gotta
The
say,
cabbage
let us
was
begin.
fun.
That's bad.
favorite vegetable.
Invisible cabbage.
Let's begin. Alright. Here we go. Andy asked right before we left why it was the square root of 10. And let's see here.
No.
Gesundheit. That was Michael.
Michael.
Gesundheit.
Hey, we're going.
Yeah.
Lettuce.
Alright, it shouldn't be radical 10. I was telling you why it was a radical, but that shouldn't be the standard deviation in X bar, right? It should be the standard deviation of the population over the square root of 10. So it should be 0.15 over the square root of 10. Because it's a sample of size 10, and the population standard deviation was 0.15. But when I'm just finding one jar, standard deviation is just the population standard deviation. Because I'm not looking at all the X bars, I'm just looking at all the X's, individual jars. So that's why you've got a difference in your standard deviations here. Your mean's the same on both, because the mean of X bar is the same as just the mean of the population. Some of you, on that last test, when the problem changes, you can't leave X as X. So you can't just assume that X is the same thing down here, because it's not. X here now stands for something different. So don't call it X again unless you change what X means. So now we're talking about X bar in the second situation. And X bar is the average weight of the contents of a random sample of 10 jars. Don't say X bar is 10 jars. That's not a variable. It's definitely not a mean. X bar is the average weight of the random sample of 10 jars. That means it's a variable. It could vary. Everything from there should be easy to understand. You just got to make sure you're in the habit of saying lower bound, upper bound, and then right here, if you put mean, you are incorrect. I'm sorry, right here it'd be correct. Mean of X, standard deviation of X. Here's where it would be wrong. That's the lower bound, that's the upper bound. That is the mean of all the X bars, and that's the standard deviation of all the X bars. The wrong notation makes you lose points there. So the probability of one of those jars being less than 16 ounces is about 25%. The probability of 10 of those jars having an average weight less than 16 ounces is just under 2%. Very big difference there. Any questions how to set those up? The thing that I'm seeing that's a problem is most of you understand how to get to the answer, but that's not getting you any credit. If you just put that, you get 0 credit. I'd be counting a point for that definition there, a point for the fact that it's normal, a point for the notation, and then a point for the work. So if all you've got is the answer and then no work, you get no credit. If you just had normal CDF equals this, you get 1 out of 4 points. You're putting too much on just how to get the answer instead of how to set the whole thing up. What you mean?
Does that say 0.2525 with the line? Like what?
Yes, sir, 0.2525. Any questions here? Now, that problem was easy because the original distribution was what? Normal. That's the only reason I was able to do this normal CDF. If it had not been normal, we've got to do something different. So, big question is, what's the shape of the sampling distribution of a sample mean? Meaning, what's the distribution of all the sample means, all the X bars look like when the sample is not taken from a normally distributed population? It depends. For large samples, the distribution of X bar would be approximately normal. For large samples, the distribution of X bar would be approximately normal. But for small samples, the distribution of X bar would more closely resemble the shape of the population from which it came. So if you don't take a very large sample, the shape of your distribution of X bar will look like the population shape. So if it's skewed left and you take a small sample, your population will be skewed left. But if it's skewed left and you take a large sample, your population would be normal. I'm sorry, your distribution of X bars would be normal. So then the question becomes, what's large? How big of a sample is big enough to make the distribution of X bar normal? It is on page 449. This is called the fundamental theorem of statistics. The fundamental theorem of statistics. What? 449. The actual answer is the next page. The fundamental theorem of statistics. It's also called the central limit theorem.
Okay.
The fundamental theorem of statistics, or the central limit theorem, says this. If you draw a simple random sample of size n from any population x, any population, meaning the population could be skewed left, it could be uniform, it could be normal, it could be skewed right, it could be bimodal. When n is large enough, and that parentheses is the key. It's the fundamental theorem of statistics because in statistics, we want to be able to predict population means. And we can't if we don't have a normal distribution of X bar. So it's fundamental to know this because you can't use normal distributions if you don't take a sample that's large enough. Large enough meaning n has to be greater than or equal to 30. That's the difference in distribution of X bar and the distribution of p hat. X bar, for it to be normal, has to be, n has to be greater than or equal to 30. P hat, for it to be normal, n times p and n times q have to be greater than or equal to 10. Two different things you have to check. So if you're dealing with the distribution of p hat, you've got to check n times p and n times q. They have to be greater than or equal to 10, no matter what the population looks like when you're doing p hat. When you're doing X bar, if the population is not normal, you have to take a sample size greater than or equal to 30. And then your distribution of X bar would be normal. Go.
Why is it 30? It's random.
It's just, if we took the time to do the example, so if you're looking on page 449 under that activity, you'd start to see that no matter what the population mean was, anytime we took a sample size of 30 or more, the sampling distribution always gets to be normal. It's more just from observation. Make sure you don't just know that if n is greater than or equal to 30, that it is normal. Also, you need to know what happens if n isn't greater than or equal to 30. The smaller n is below 30, the more the distribution will look like what? The more the shape of the distribution will look like the shape of the population. More the shape of the distribution of X bar would look like the shape of the original population. But if n's greater than or equal to 30, you can know it will be approximately normal. Fill any blanks you need there. You can see what happens if you turn over to 450 right below the central limit theorem. Look how weird that population distribution is. You've really got three different places the distribution is. It doesn't exist in a little blank, and it doesn't exist in another blank, so it's trimodal. And it's definitely not normal. I guess you'd call it skewed to the right. Very weird distribution. But then notice, if I start taking samples from that distribution and finding the average of the samples, look at the top of 451, what they start to look like. On A, at the top of 451, when I'm just taking a sample of size 2, it doesn't look that different from the original population. When I increase it to 5, it starts looking a lot closer to normal, but you have way too much area in the tails to be normal. 10, still closer to normal. Closer than 5 was, the sample size of 5. But still way too much area in the tails. Once you get over to N=25, it's starting to look really normal. Even though the population was nowhere near normal. As that sample size increases, the sampling distribution of X bar, all the X bars will start to look more and more normal. And after you take a sample of 30 or greater, you can assume it's approximately normal. So let's do some similarities and some differences between p hat and X bar. P hat and X bar, on both of them, you have to check what? You're going to use a distribution, a sampling distribution on p hat or X bar. On either one, you have to check for this.
Normal.
You do have to check it for normal, but you check normal different ways. So what do they have that is you check the same way?
Sample size.
Sample size, what about it?
Well, for,
What did you say? No, that's for normal. Less than 10%. You can't find standard deviation on either one, p hat or X bar, unless your sample is less than 10% of the population. So you won't even be able to get started. So whether you're doing p hat or X bar, you've got to check the 10% rule. What does it check for? It checks for independence, and independence allows you to find standard deviation. Then you have to check for normalcy, but the way you check for normalcy is different. The way you check to be allowed to do standard deviation is the same, 10%. It's got to be less than 10% of the population. For the way you check for normalcy, for p hat, n times p and n times p have to be greater than 10. For X bar, n has to be greater than or equal to 30. Alright, I'm going to give you a second. You should read the entire example that starts at the bottom of 451 and goes all the way through 452. That's the end of the chapter. We'll take a few more notes, but that's putting everything from 7.1 and 7.3 together. 7.2 put everything from 7.1 and 7.2 together. turn the page over 451, go back to the front, and start to try and understand, like, this is real world applicable now. You can actually start to use these things in real world situations. I get that you may not own an air conditioning company, but you can apply this to lots of different situations. Your company's got a contract to perform preventative maintenance on thousands of air conditioning units in a large city, based on service records from the past year. So you go back and look at past records, which you'll have the option to do should you own a company. The time and hours a technician requires to complete the work follows the distribution whose density curve is shown in the margin. Look at that density curve. What is that? That's just past data. That's something you could collect, and you should collect if you want to make wise decisions running your company. So now if I look at that, why would it make sense that an air conditioning company, the distribution of times it takes for them to work on these units is skewed to the right? What do we know about that distribution?
It's not normal.
It's not normal, but let's talk about, like, just explain to me what we know from reading, like what we can say, real world, what's going on.
It's taking them too long.
What do you mean it's taking them too long?
Well, it says that like their mean is 0, and if it's skewed right, that means that the majority of like times a technician works, it's going to be they want it to be quick as possible, I guess. So like this is like taking them too long to do their stuff.
Well, we don't know all of that. First of all, though, it does say the mean is 1.
It said the most likely outcomes are close to 0.
What does that mean?
Okay, and then it says mean time is 1. Okay.
Well, what's it mean if most of the outcomes are close to 0? Why would that make sense? What's happening in the world here?
It's taking a shorter time to work.
What?
It's taking a shorter time to work.
On average, it doesn't take long to fix them, which would make sense. Like when you go to an air conditioner and you're working on it, if you know what you're doing, most of the time it's just a quick fix. So what we're learning, what you should be, this is part of the problem. This is why the ACT is so hard for so many people is you can't read a graph. What's that graph say? Well, if the graph represents dots, and each dot represents the time it takes to fix an air conditioner, most of the times to fix an air conditioner are between 0 and 1 hour. What's that mean? It means it doesn't take that long. On average, they're fixing them within an hour. Will there be some air conditioners that are just ruined and take a long time? Yes. But what's going to happen more often? That it's just a quick fix. So that's what that graph tells us. On average, it's not taking that long. On average, it takes about an hour, but there's a lot more to the left than to the right, correct? Or on average, the majority takes closer to 0. So now turn the page. So what do we do with that? Because the question now is this. You know what's gone on in your company in the past year. And now you've got to decide. You know that you're going to service 70 air conditioning units in the city. And so you got to figure out how many people you want to hire this week. You plan to budget an average of 1.1 hours per unit for a technician to complete the work. Will this be enough? Why would you care how much time you're budgeting for them to work?
How much they get paid per hour?
Do what?
And you decide how much they get paid per hour.
Well, what do you mean? If I'm budgeting 1.1 hours for them to work, why do I care how much time I budget for them to work?
You don't want to pay them to work like too much.
What do you mean? Say more. I think you're both meaning the same thing.
Like if you're paying them a wage of 1.1 hours, you want them to work for 1.1 hours, not like 0.5 hours, and pay them for the amount of work of 1.1 hours.
Yeah, if this upcoming week's coming up and I'm gonna figure out how many people I'm gonna hire, I know how many jobs there are. I've got calls on average for about 70 jobs a week, every week. So I know I'm gonna have about 70 people calling this upcoming week. And if I'm gonna have 70 people calling for jobs, I need to know how long it's gonna take them. So if it's gonna take them 1.1 hours, that'd be 70.1 or 70.7 hours. Does everybody follow this? If jobs on average take 1.1 hours, and there's 70 jobs, then if I assume that's 1.1 hours per job, then that means next week I've got 70.7 hours of work to do. If you're talking about a 40-hour work week, how many people do I want to hire? Thanks, Shauna. 40-hour work week, I'd probably want to hire 2 people. Yeah?
Yeah.
Thank you. What if I'm really wrong? What if it's not 1.1 hours on average to do the job? What if it's actually 3 hours?
And you're not getting everything. You're losing.
If it's actually 3 hours per job, if I was wrong in my estimation, how much work do I have to do?
3 times 70.
210 hours. Can 2 people do 210 hours of work in a week?
They'd have to grow.
Probably quit. If they do, you're gonna pay them tons of overtime. So it's something you actually wanna know. Also know, what if it doesn't take 1.1 hours? What if it takes 0.5 hours? If it takes 0.5 hours, then you've got 35 hours of work for that week. But if you've hired 2 people, that means one of them is sitting around that whole week and getting paid. Because there's no work for them. Because one person can do 35 hours in a week. So how are you going to determine how many people to hire for that week? Well, you've got to figure out what an accurate estimate would be of job for that week, of hours of work for that week. So now read. That's what's going on here. Like, it's something that you can actually use to make wise business decisions. What's the probability that the average maintenance time, X bar, for 70 units exceeds 1.1 hours? So what we're really saying is, what's the probability that it's going to take longer than 1.1 hours per job? Because if it takes longer than 1.1 hours per job, what do I need to do?
Hire more people.
Hire more people. So if there's like a 5% chance that it takes more than 1.1 hours per job, I'm probably not hiring more people that week. I'll stick with what I have. But if there's a 95% chance it's going to take more than 1.1 hours, I may need to hire another person so that I can get all the jobs done so people don't fire my company. Now read. There's the background behind all the math. Now you do the math to actually figure out the answer. Read 452.
On the formula for like the standard deviation of X bar, for the top one, why is 1 the standard deviation out of the population?
back from the beginning on page 451.
How does it say it?
It tells you. Last sentence, the mean time is an hour, standard deviation of the population from the past is an hour. Please understand, on 452, if this is a real AP test question, you need every single word from the word after state till it ends with the word work and that drawing of the density curve. I think some of you have misunderstood and think that just some of those correct numbers get you full credit. It does not. You would need to start with the state and end all the way down to the end. You need all of that. Not word for word, but very close and definitely meaning the same thing. So I'm listening, ask questions if you have a question about any single step there. And I take that back. The very last sentence in the conclusion is not something you would have to write. You don't need to write that to get credit. Because that wasn't the question. The question was, what's the probability that the average maintenance time exceeds 1.1 hours? So you answered that with the first sentence of conclusion. If you put the second sentence, that'd be fine, but I wouldn't even recommend putting the second sentence. It's just extra information. Questions you have about any of that? Because that's what you need to be able to do on the test.